Breaking point: Israel and Qatar stand on the edge of a dangerous new rivalry that could ignite war fears across the Middle East. Drone strikes, political alliances, and nuclear tensions are building at a shocking pace. Stay tuned, because what's happening right now may change the course of global security forever. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most explosive and shocking developments in the Middle East, the rising rivalry between Israel and Qatar. What was once an indirect tension fueled by political disagreements and financial maneuvering has now evolved into an outright confrontation that is raising alarms across the globe. Analysts are calling it a breaking point as both nations move closer toward actions that could ignite fears of war. Israel, a regional powerhouse backed by decades of military strength and advanced technology, views Qatar not just as a political irritant, but as a potential threat because of Doha's growing ties with rival nations. Meanwhile, Qatar positions itself as a rising diplomatic player, heavily investing in global politics while quietly building strategic defense links that Israel sees as dangerous. Add to this the simmering involvement of powerful allies like the United States, Iran, and Turkey, and you have a situation that is far from just a regional quarrel. It's a potential spark for wider instability. In this video, we will break down how tensions escalated to this critical level, what is fueling the deep mistrust, and why global powers are suddenly paying very close attention. From drone strike fears to underground political deals, we will explore every angle of this danger standoff. By the end, you'll see how fragile the balance truly is and why experts warn that war fears are no longer just speculation, but a looming possibility. To truly understand why Israel and Qatar are at each other's throats today, we have to look back at the history of their interactions. Unlike Israel's open hostility with nations like Iran or its long-standing conflict with Palestine, Qatar's role has always been more subtle but equally provocative. Qatar has long positioned itself as a supporter of Palestinian causes, frequently channeling aid into Gaza, a move Israel views as a direct challenge to its security. For Israel, Qatar's financial and political influence in Gaza isn't just humanitarian, it's strategic leverage. The funds and supplies that flow into Gaza from Doha often strengthen groups that oppose Israeli policies. This has bred deep mistrust. Israel believes Qatar is trying to undermine its stability under the guise of aid, while Qatar insists it is filling humanitarian gaps ignored by others. Additionally, Qatar's foreign policy often runs against Israel's interests, from providing diplomatic platforms to controversial political voices to backing initiatives that challenge Israeli narratives globally. Doha has consistently frustrated Tel Aviv. Israel, in turn, has worked quietly but firmly to limit Qatar's influence wherever possible. What makes this rivalry even more dangerous is its indirect nature. Unlike conventional enemies who fight openly, Israel and Qatar have operated in the shadows for years, using diplomacy, media, and proxy actors to push their agendas. Now, however, that shadow war is edging into the open, threatening to destabilize not only the region, but potentially drawing in other global powers. One of the most powerful tools in this rivalry isn't missiles or drones. It's information. Both Israel and Qatar understand the immense influence of media in shaping perceptions, rallying support, and discrediting opponents. In the modern age, news coverage, online platforms, and strategic messaging have become weapons just as important as military hardware. For Israel, Qatar's use of its vast media resources appears to deliberately challenge its policies and highlight stories that damage its international image. Meanwhile, Qatar views Israel's narrative efforts as attempts to silence criticism and portray Doha as a destabilizing force in the region. Both sides accuse each other of spreading propaganda designed to manipulate global opinion. The stakes are high because narratives can shift global politics. Reports of humanitarian crises, civilian casualties, or political corruption can sway international sentiment. Governments then feel pressure from their populations to act, creating ripple effects in diplomatic arenas. This makes media influence not just a background issue, but a front line in the rivalry. The result is a war of perception that spills over into real-world diplomacy. Every headline, every broadcast, and every social media campaign becomes another weapon. Each nation seeks to strengthen its own position while weakening the other. This cycle of accusation and counter-accusation has hardened mistrust, making reconciliation nearly impossible. Words ignite emotions, and emotions often push nations toward decisions they might otherwise avoid. In this way, propaganda becomes a dangerous accelerant in an already volatile rivalry. As tensions mount, one of the most alarming developments is the fear that Israel may launch drone strikes against Qatar or its interests abroad. Israel has a long history of using drones for surveillance and precision strikes, particularly against what it deems terrorist threats. The mere suggestion that these capabilities could be turned toward Qatar sends shockwaves across the region. Why drones? Because they offer plausible deniability. Israel could carry out a strike without sending in troops, minimizing its risk while delivering a clear message. But the consequences of such an action would be catastrophic. Qatar, though small in size, is a wealthy nation with strong alliances. Any Israeli strike on Qatari soil could trigger a chain reaction, pulling in regional powers and sparking exactly the kind of war everyone fears. For now, much of the drone strike talk is speculation, but sources suggest Israel has already stepped up surveillance over areas linked to Qatar's military and diplomatic activities. This isn't just about defense, it's about intimidation. Israel wants to remind Qatar that while it may play the political game, Tel Aviv still has unmatched military might. On the other side, Qatar has invested heavily in its own defense systems, partly to deter such scenarios. With advanced technology purchased from allies like the US, Doha is making it clear that it won't be an easy target. The danger here is miscalculation, one wrong move, one false alarm, and the Middle East could face a new and devastating front of conflict. No rivalry exists in a vacuum, and the Israel-Qatar standoff is especially complicated because of the web of alliances that surround it. Israel enjoys strong support from the United States, with billions in military aid and political backing. Washington often acts as Israel's shield in international forums, making it nearly untouchable on the global stage. Qatar, on the other hand, has carved out an unusual position. It is home to one of the largest U.S. military bases in the Middle East, yet it also maintains ties with Iran and Turkey, both of whom are often critical of Israel. This balancing act gives Qatar influence far beyond its size. By keeping lines open with multiple powers, Qatar positions itself as a diplomatic broker, but it also risks being seen as double-dealing. For Israel, this is intolerable. They see Qatar's connections with Iran as particularly dangerous. Iran is Israel's greatest regional rival, and any cooperation between Tehran and Doha, whether military or financial, is viewed as a direct threat. Meanwhile, Turkey's backing only emboldens Qatar's defiance. What this creates is a layered conflict where any action against Qatar could involve multiple nations. A drone strike, for example, wouldn't just anger Doha, it might trigger responses from Turkey or even Iran. Similarly, if Qatar ramps up support for Palestinian groups, Israel's response could drag the U.S. into awkward positions, forced to balance its allies. In essence, the alliances at play make this rivalry not just bilateral, but potentially multilateral, with the stakes climbing higher every day. Beyond military and diplomatic maneuvers, economics plays a critical role in the Israel-Qatar rivalry. Qatar's immense wealth, derived primarily from its natural gas reserves, gives it outsized influence in global politics. By leveraging its financial clout, Doha funds humanitarian programs, invests in global markets, and supports initiatives across the region. Israel views many of these actions as attempts to undermine its influence. In Gaza, Qatari funds provide lifelines to families living under blockade. While these funds are often coordinated with international organizations, Israel fears the money strengthens groups hostile to its existence. This perception fuels anger in Tel Aviv, where officials argue that Qatar is disguising political warfare as charity. On the other side, Israel has developed its own economic strengths, particularly in technology, defense, and innovation. Israeli defense companies sell weapons and cybersecurity systems worldwide, often to nations that also deal with Qatar. This creates indirect economic competition where both countries vie for influence through soft power and strategic partnerships. The danger lies in escalation. Economic pressure can easily shift into political retaliation. Israel might lobby for sanctions or restrictions on Qatari investments, while Qatar could use its wealth to influence global narratives and policy against Israel. In a world where economics and politics are deeply intertwined, financial warfare could be just as destabilizing as missiles or drones. Ultimately, the rivalry isn't just about ideology, it's about control of narratives, resources, and influence. And when money mixes with politics, the potential for explosive consequences becomes even greater. The world is watching the Israel-Qatar rivalry with growing concern. For the United States, this is a nightmare scenario, two of its allies edging toward confrontation. Washington depends on Israel as a cornerstone of its Middle East policy, but it also relies on Qatar for military bases and regional mediation. The U.S. doesn't want to choose between them, but if tensions explode, it may have no choice. European nations are equally alarmed. Qatar supplies significant amounts of natural gas to Europe, especially in the wake of energy crisis. Any instability involving Doha could shake global energy markets. At the same time, European countries have strong diplomatic and economic ties with Israel. The possibility of being caught in the middle of this rivalry makes them wary and nervous. In the wider Middle East, reactions vary. Some nations quietly back Israel, seeing Qatar as too sympathetic to Islamist movements. Others side with Qatar, viewing Israel's growing power as a destabilizing force. This division makes a unified regional response nearly impossible, leaving the conflict to escalate without a clear path for mediation. For global citizens, the fear is simple: another Middle Eastern war that spills over into global markets, migration crisis, and security threats. The world has seen enough turmoil from conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. A new front involving Israel and Qatar could reignite instability on a scale that no one is prepared to handle. That's why this rivalry is being watched so closely, with fear growing each passing day. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this rivalry is the whisper of nuclear implications. Israel is widely believed to possess nuclear weapons, though it has never confirmed this officially. For decades, it has maintained a policy of ambiguity, neither admitting nor denying its arsenal. But make no mistake, Israel has the capability to deliver devastating nuclear strikes if it ever feels existentially threatened. Qatar, of course, does not possess nuclear weapons. However, its ties with nations like Iran raise red flags for Israel. Iran's nuclear ambitions have long worried Tel Aviv, and any perception that Qatar might facilitate or shield Tehran's progress is seen as a direct provocation. Even the hint of cooperation in nuclear research or strategy could push Israel into drastic measures. This nuclear shadow makes the rivalry particularly dangerous. Wars can be fought with conventional weapons, but once nuclear fears enter the conversation, the stakes rise to unimaginable levels. While no one expects Israel to use nuclear weapons against Qatar directly, the existence of these weapons changes the calculus. It emboldens Israel while terrifying its rivals. Moreover, discussions around nuclear issues fuel global anxiety. If the Israel-Qatar rivalry intersects with Iran's nuclear program, it could spiral into a much larger conflict involving multiple nations and potentially devastating consequences. In international politics, perception is often as dangerous as reality, and right now, the perception is that this rivalry is inching closer to dangerous thresholds. So, how could this rivalry actually spiral into open conflict? Analysts suggest several scenarios. The first involves Gaza. If Qatar increases its funding or diplomatic backing for Palestinian groups, Israel could retaliate with military strikes that indirectly challenge Doha. This might not mean hitting Qatari soil directly, but the message would be unmistakable. A second scenario involves drone warfare. As mentioned earlier, Israel could use its advanced drone technology to target assets linked to Qatar's alliances, perhaps in neighboring countries or even international waters. Such actions would send a chilling signal without immediately sparking all-out war. A third possibility is diplomatic warfare. Israel could lobby international bodies to sanction Qatar or restrict its global financial activities. Qatar, in turn, might leverage its wealth and media influence to counterattack, fueling anti-Israel sentiment worldwide. This could create a cycle of tit for tat escalation that eventually breaks into military confrontation. Finally, there's the nightmare scenario, a miscalculation, a false alarm on a radar system, a misidentified drone, or an overzealous military response could trigger an unintended clash. In regions as volatile as the Middle East, history has shown that wars often begin not with deliberate decisions, but with mistakes. In all these scenarios, the underlying theme is the same. The rivalry is unstable, fragile, and dangerously close to breaking into something the world may not be able to contain. Each passing day adds fuel to the fire, making escalation seem less like a possibility and more like an eventuality. As we've seen throughout this deep dive, the Israel-Qatar rivalry isn't a simple disagreement between two nations. It's a complex web of history, propaganda, military threats, economic competition, alliances, and nuclear shadows. What makes it so dangerous is that every element feeds into the other, creating a cycle that seems almost impossible to break. The media war intensifies mistrust. Economic rivalries amplify political hostilities. Drone threats raise military fears, while alliances pull in outside powers who might otherwise stay neutral. And looming over all of it is the question of nuclear escalation, an unspoken but ever-present reminder of how high the stakes truly are. For Israel, this is about security, survival, and maintaining regional dominance. For Qatar, it's about influence, independence, and proving that even a small state can shape the global conversation. Both sides believe they are justified, and both are unwilling to back down. That's why experts are warning that war fears are no longer theoretical. They are pressing, immediate, and deeply concerning. The question we now face is simple but chilling. How long can this rivalry continue without crossing the line into open conflict? History suggests that fragile situations like this rarely remain frozen forever. Something eventually gives, and when it does, the consequences will be global. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into global events. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this rivalry will explode into war, or can cooler heads prevail?